After more than a century, the Titanic hitting an iceberg and sinking in April 1912. The wreckage was only discovered in 1985, and since then more than 5,000 artefacts have been retrieved from the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean.
More than a century beneath the freezing Atlantic, a silent world guards its secrets. But when a single handbag, lost in the chaos of 1912, was pulled from the Titanic's debris field, researchers were stunned by what they found inside. It wasn't a treasure. It wasn't jewelry. It was something far more powerful, a twist of fate frozen in time. This is the story of how one ordinary object rewrote everything we thought we knew about the world's most famous shipwreck. A century-old mystery resurfaces from the Atlantic depths. The tragedy of the Titanic has lingered in public imagination for more than a century, a haunting story of ambition, loss, and the unforgiving power of nature. Although the ship sank in April 1912, the world's fascination has never faded. When the wreckage was finally located in 1985, more than 2 miles beneath the surface of the Atlantic Ocean, it opened a new chapter in Titanic research, a chance to recover and study the thousands of artifacts that went down with the ship. Since then, more than 5,000 objects have been retrieved from the debris field surrounding the wreck. These items, ranging from pieces of the ship's structure to intimate belongings of passengers, are far more than museum displays. They are vessels of memory. Each artifact carries a frozen moment from that night, whispering stories of the lives abruptly interrupted. Inside a highly secured warehouse in Georgia, whose exact location remains confidential, these relics are preserved with immense care. Only a small number of people have ever been allowed access. Recently, science editor Rebecca Morell stepped into this restricted space and documented a discovery that stunned researchers worldwide: the recovery of a century-old handbag belonging to a passenger named Marian Meanwell. At first glance, the handbag appeared delicate, fashionable, and unexpectedly well-preserved for something that endured the crushing depths of the ocean. But the real surprise wasn't the bag itself. It was what researchers found inside. If the Titanic has been studied for decades, then how did this one object remain hidden for more than 100 years? And what does its sudden discovery reveal that historians never saw coming? The handbag of Marian Meanwell, a life reconstructed through objects. Marian Meanwell was a 63-year-old milliner, a skilled craftswoman who specialized in the decorative detailing of hats and dresses. On that fateful voyage, she was traveling from England to the United States to join her recently widowed daughter. Her story, like many on the Titanic, seemed ordinary at first glance, but the handbag recovered from the wreck revealed details that painted a richer, more poignant picture. The bag contained a medical inspection card, an item all third-class passengers were required to carry. This piece of paper confirmed that travelers were not bringing infectious diseases into the United States, a strict immigration measure of the time. But this seemingly routine document held a twist of fate. Researchers discovered that Mara had not originally been scheduled to sail on the Titanic. The card indicated she was supposed to board the Majestic, another ship entirely. A last-minute rerouting placed her onto the RMS Titanic, an act of tragic coincidence that sealed her fate. This revelation left researchers stunned. The handbag had become more than a personal accessory. It became a historical pivot point, a reminder that chance decisions can alter the trajectory of entire lives. Without this rerouting, Marian Meanwell might have safely completed her journey and reunited with her daughter. Instead, her belongings now lie preserved as part of one of the greatest maritime tragedies in history. Inside the warehouse, surrounded by artifacts that echo the scale of the disaster, the handbag stood out because of its intimacy. While large pieces of the ship, massive steel plates, machinery, and rivets tell of technological ambition and structural failure, Mara's bag tells of human fragility, of the ordinary details of life suddenly swallowed by catastrophe. As Morell described, everything here is a reminder of a tragedy at sea more than 100 years ago. And yet, some reminders cut deeper than others. A handbag is something personal, something touched daily, something chosen and cherished. To see it intact, after surviving unimaginable pressure under the ocean, added emotional weight to the discovery. What shocked researchers most wasn't the preservation, it was the story the bag unlocked. One that shifted historical understanding from general tragedy to deeply personal narrative: the Titanic's structure and the rivet controversy. As researchers moved from the intimate details of Marian Meanwell's belongings to the larger structural artifacts in the warehouse, another category of recovered item offered a different kind of insight, one grounded in engineering rather than personal history. Among the most crucial components found were rivets, the small yet indispensable metal fasteners that held together the Titanic's massive steel hull. Each rivet represented a single point in a vast network of structural connections. The Titanic had more than 3 million of them, overlapping steel plates, to form what many believed to be an unsinkable ship. The rivets were meant to be strong, resilient, and able to withstand tremendous pressure and force. Yet decades of research have raised unsettling questions about whether some of these rivets were fabricated with materials that were, by modern standards, dangerously substandard. In the Georgia warehouse, the recovered rivets told their own silent story. Experts examining the metal discovered a high concentration of slag, a glass-like impurity known to weaken structural integrity. Slag makes metal more brittle, especially under cold temperatures, conditions that the Titanic most certainly faced that April night in 1912. As one researcher explained, if a rivet's head popped off easily due to brittleness, it could allow seams in the hull to open faster, essentially creating a larger entry point for freezing water. Under normal circumstances, the ship may have withstood more damage, but a combination of design limitations, manufacturing shortcuts, and the extreme cold may have accelerated the disaster. This theory does not claim that faulty rivets caused the sinking. The iceberg did that. But it suggests that poor quality materials may have allowed the ship to flood far more rapidly than originally thought. Standing in the warehouse among bins of these rivets, visibly worn yet unmistakably intact, Rebecca Morell and the research team reflected on how these small components became key pieces of a global tragedy. It wasn't just human error or natural force at play. It was the sum of countless decisions, from industrial processes to cost-saving choices made long before the Titanic ever left the dock. Yet, not all artifacts in the warehouse speak of structural failure. Many speak of human life on board, the stark segregation of classes, and the everyday objects that hinted at Titanic's floating society. Why would a simple handbag survive 2 miles beneath the ocean when so much of the ship didn't? And what secret was it protecting inside its leather folds all this time? The silent echoes of social class. Everyday items tell a divided story. Among the rows of shelves and meticulously catalogued artifacts are the ordinary items that once filled the Titanic's cabins, dining areas, and passengers' pockets. These objects illustrate another dimension of the disaster, the vast social divide aboard the world's most famous ship. Researchers found sturdy, simple ceramic cups used by third-class passengers. They were thick, undecorated, durable, built for utility rather than elegance. These items painted a picture of a modest experience: communal dining, sparse quarters, and limited amenities. Despite the harsh contrast with other accommodations, for many third-class passengers, Titanic still represented opportunity, a chance for a better life across the ocean. Then, on a different shelf, sat a collection of delicate, intricately patterned china reserved for first-class passengers. These pieces were thin, refined, and adorned with detailed designs, symbols of wealth, privilege, and the expectation of luxury, even at sea. First-class travelers enjoyed private dining saloons, lavish meals, and grand lounges designed to rival the finest hotels of the era. To see these items side by side is to witness the two worlds that existed simultaneously aboard Titanic, one humble, the other extravagant. And yet, both suffered the same fate. The contrast is startling. The chipped, utilitarian cups that survived the sinking appear almost stoic, while the fragile porcelain pieces, some cracked, some astonishingly unbroken, remind us how delicacy can sometimes endure even the harshest environments. These mundane objects now carry emotional weight they were never meant to hold. The cup of a third-class passenger might have once belonged to a young immigrant chasing the promise of a new beginning. A first-class china plate might have served a wealthy socialite enjoying oysters in a gilded dining hall just days before the tragedy. Every item in the warehouse is no longer just an object. Each one is a fragment of a lost world. But perhaps the most controversial category of objects in the warehouse isn't the cups, plates, or even the rivets. It's the artifacts recovered from what many consider a gravesite, an issue that sparks global debate even today. Should the Titanic be disturbed? The debate around salvaging artifacts. The Titanic lies more than 12,000 feet beneath the surface of the Atlantic, a resting place many consider sacred. For decades, the question of whether divers and researchers should retrieve artifacts from the wreck has caused intense controversy. Some believe the site should remain untouched, a solemn underwater tomb for the more than 1,500 souls who lost their lives. Others argue that preservation, education, and historical understanding can only happen if items are brought to the surface, conserved, and studied. The company at the center of this debate is RMS Titanic, Inc., the sole entity legally granted salvage rights to the wreck. Their job is both scientific and emotional, to recover objects while also honoring the memory of those who perished. When asked about criticism regarding disturbing a gravesite, representatives from the company are firm in their response. They say the goal is not exploitation, but preservation. According to them, most of humanity will never have the chance to descend to the wreck itself. The extreme depth, pressure, and cost make such expeditions nearly impossible for everyday people. Yet the Titanic is a story that belongs to the world, a defining moment of the 20th century. By retrieving these artifacts and exhibiting them globally, RMS Titanic, Inc. believes they are giving the public an opportunity to connect with history in a tangible way. A recovered suitcase, a teacup, a rivet, or a handbag, these items transform a distant tragedy into a deeply human narrative. This belief is central to their work. They argue that if the artifacts were left untouched, the wreckage would continue to deteriorate. The deep ocean is not a static environment. Bacteria, currents, and chemical reactions are continuously eroding the ship. In fact, experts predict that within a few decades, major parts of the Titanic may collapse entirely. Salvaging, in this context, becomes a race against time, a mission to preserve what is still recoverable before nature reclaims it forever. The newly recovered objects from the latest expedition, including the ancient handbag, are reminders of just how much the ocean still holds. Each dive reveals more fragments of the ship and more pieces of lives cut short. And with each artifact raised, researchers must confront both the scientific excitement of discovery and the emotional weight of what it represents. But the story doesn't end with retrieval. Every item undergoes years of meticulous conservation work to prevent further decay. Some, like leather shoes and paper documents, require specialized treatments to stabilize their fragile condition. The handbag of Marian Meanwell is no exception. It survived in remarkable shape, but salt water and extreme pressure would have destroyed it without careful intervention. The ethical questions surrounding Titanic salvage may never be fully resolved. Yet, as long as new artifacts continue to emerge from the deep, the world will continue to wrestle with how best to honor the past, by leaving it undisturbed or by bringing its stories to the surface. A glimpse into the latest expedition and what researchers hope to uncover next. Although thousands of Titanic artifacts have already been recovered, the ocean floor surrounding the wreck still contains countless objects scattered across the debris field. The Titanic didn't settle on the seabed in one piece. Its contents spilled out violently as the ship split apart, creating a vast archaeological zone stretching across several acres. The most recent expedition, conducted by RMS Titanic, Inc., has identified new clusters of objects that researchers believe hold significant historical value. Using high-resolution sonar and remotely operated vehicles, ROVs, the team mapped sections of the wreck area that had previously been inaccessible due to unstable currents and limited visibility. Among the items spotted, but not yet retrieved, were fragments of ornate first-class furnishings, sections of decorative metalwork, personal passenger effects partially buried in sediment, and machinery components from the ship's midsection. To the untrained eye, these might appear as nothing more than debris, but for marine archaeologists, each object is a clue, a puzzle piece that helps reconstruct the ship's final moments and what life was like aboard before the disaster. The ROVs captured detailed footage of one particularly intriguing area, a region containing several small containers believed to hold personal items. Whether they belong to crew members, wealthy passengers, or third-class immigrants remains unknown. But if retrieved, these items could offer an unprecedented look into the diversity of lives aboard the Titanic. There is also interest in recovering more structural components of the ship, not merely for display but for scientific study. The continued deterioration of the Titanic is a subject of intense research. By analyzing sections of steel, rivets, and other materials exposed to more than a century of deep-sea conditions, scientists aim to improve understanding of marine corrosion and metal fatigue. This knowledge goes far beyond the historical. It offers insights applicable to modern engineering, naval design, and long-term underwater preservation methods. Yet for many, the real fascination remains with the personal stories, like that of Marian Meanwell. Objects tied to individual passengers capture global attention in a way no ship ever could. They humanize the statistics, turning the tragedy from a historical event into something emotionally resonant. And as expeditions continue, who knows what other artifacts may surface? A letter never delivered, a bracelet engraved with initials, a child's toy. Every object, no matter how small, carries the possibility of reshaping our understanding of the people who boarded the Titanic, never imagining the fate that awaited them. Why are experts convinced that brand new discoveries are still hiding in the debris field? And what could be lying just inches beneath the sediment that might rewrite Titanic history again? The handbag's hidden messages, what researchers learned from its contents. When the recovered handbag belonging to Marian Meanwell was first opened, researchers expected to find typical personal items, perhaps a comb, a few coins, a piece of jewelry, or even scraps of handwritten notes. Instead, what they discovered was something far more revealing and historically significant, a medical inspection card that fundamentally altered the known details of her journey. At first, the card appeared routine. In 1912, all third-class passengers were required to carry medical certificates to prove they were not bringing infectious diseases into the United States. Ellis Island immigration authorities enforced strict health screening policies, especially for impoverished travelers seeking new opportunities. The presence of the card itself was not surprising. What shocked researchers was the ship name written on it. Instead of RMS Titanic, the card listed another vessel, the Majestic. This single detail reframed Mara's story and introduced a haunting twist of fate. She had not been meant to sail on the Titanic at all. Her route had been changed, possibly due to scheduling adjustments, ticketing errors, or ship capacity issues, placing her on a voyage that would end in disaster. This small, fragile document was more than a piece of paper. It was evidence of a life redirected at the last moment, and a reminder of how chance, timing, and coincidence played devastating roles in the lives of many Titanic passengers. Researchers studying Mara's life discovered additional layers of meaning in her journey. At 63 years old, she was not a tourist, nor a wealthy socialite. She was a milliner, a craftswoman who worked on the decorative details of hats and dresses. Her reason for traveling was heartbreaking. She was on her way to comfort and support her recently widowed daughter in America. Every artifact recovered from the Titanic tells a story, but few speak as loudly or as painfully as Marian Meanwell's handbag. It is one of the rare items that links a personal tragedy directly to a twist of fate documented in writing. Her rerouting was not hearsay or speculation. It was recorded, preserved, and later found nearly intact, more than 2 miles beneath the ocean. To researchers, this discovery illuminated not only the fragility of life, but the unexpectedly durable power of artifacts. Paper, leather, ink, materials not meant to survive the crushing, salty depths, had outlasted human lifetimes to deliver a story that might otherwise have been forgotten. The handbag became a symbol. Of the thousands of items recovered, few encapsulate the Titanic's blend of human drama and historical intrigue as clearly as this one small accessory. Yet, the human stories recovered from the Titanic extend far beyond one woman and her belongings. Each artifact contributes to a larger understanding of what life and death looked like aboard the ship. And nowhere is this more evident than in the personal effects found scattered across the debris field. Relics of lives interrupted. What the debris field reveals about the final moments. The Titanic's descent to the ocean floor was not gentle, nor was it orderly. When the massive vessel split apart in the early hours of April 15, 1912, everything inside it, every suitcase, every chair, every piece of crockery, every personal belonging, was violently ejected into the sea. What slowly settled onto the seabed over the following hours became what researchers now call the debris field, a vast, haunting archaeological landscape that stretches across several acres of the Atlantic floor. Unlike the ship's two main hull sections, which lie relatively intact, the debris field is a sprawling mosaic of human lives abruptly interrupted. What makes this underwater graveyard so eerie is its randomness. Items that once belonged to wealthy first-class passengers, ornate porcelain, monogrammed silverware, fragments of mahogany furniture, now rest beside simple tin cups, coarse blankets, and utilitarian utensils used by third-class immigrants. In life, Titanic rigidly enforced its class barriers. In death, those divisions dissolved completely. There is no hierarchy on the ocean floor. Everything lies together in silent equality. For marine archaeologists, the debris field is an invaluable record of the ship's final moments. The twisted metal beams, bent and torn as though made of paper, reveal the immense physical forces that ripped through the vessel as it broke apart. These jagged remnants show how the hull twisted, how decks collapsed, and how structural components failed under the overwhelming pressure of the ocean and the internal stress of the breakup. Each piece of steel is a clue, a marker that helps reconstruct the mechanical violence of the disaster. Interspersed among the structural fragments are deeply personal objects that speak to the chaos experienced by passengers. Suitcases burst open as they fell through the water, scattering clothing that now lies preserved in swirls of sediment. Shoes, sometimes still paired, sometimes isolated, sit quietly on the seabed. A pocket watch recovered from the debris was found frozen at a specific time, its hands forever marking the moment it was submerged. Letters, once carried with hope or longing, have fused into fragile paper blocks, the ink long washed away, but the emotional weight still palpable. Some of the best preserved items survived because of the unusual conditions of the deep ocean. Leather, for instance, withstands decay remarkably well at extreme depth due to the absence of oxygen and the cold temperatures. Documents sealed inside leather bags or trunks, like Marian Meanwell's medical card, escaped the typical fate of paper exposed to seawater. Even small, delicate items such as perfume bottles, grooming kits, and spectacles have been recovered in shockingly intact condition. Each of these objects, whether mundane or extraordinary, carries a story. They belong to someone who boarded the Titanic with expectations of leisure, of migration, of reunion, of opportunity. The debris field turns these expectations into elegies. It is impossible to look at a child's toy lying beside a twisted metal railing without imagining the small hands that once held it. A piece of fine china no longer evokes elegance. It evokes a meal unfinished, a journey cut short. More than a century later, the debris field continues to shape our understanding of how the Titanic sank. By studying the pattern of objects scattered across the seabed, researchers have reconstructed the ship's breakup sequence with striking accuracy. They can determine which sections failed first, how water filled particular compartments, and how objects drifted as the enormous ship was swallowed by the Atlantic. But beyond the scientific revelations, the emotional reality of the debris field is overwhelming. To explore this environment, whether through remotely operated vehicles or through footage recorded during dives, is to walk through a silent memorial. It is a place where time has stopped, where lives remain suspended in their final moments, and where every object is a reminder of the human cost of the tragedy. Among all the relics recovered from this site, the handbag belonging to Marian Meanwell stands out, not because it is the most valuable or the most visually striking, but because it bridges the gap between the familiar and the unimaginable. It is an ordinary object that survived extraordinary circumstances, a personal belonging that endured long after the person who carried it was lost. And in that survival, it serves as a testament to the countless untold stories still resting in the cold darkness of the Atlantic. Why one handbag matters, how a single artifact reshapes the Titanic's legacy. As researchers continue to study the thousands of objects recovered from the Titanic's resting place, they often emphasize that no single artifact tells the whole story of the tragedy. And yet, every so often, an item emerges that encapsulates the human, historical, and emotional dimensions of the disaster in a uniquely powerful way. Marian Meanwell's handbag is one such artifact. At first, it seemed like an ordinary accessory, a fashionable but practical bag carried by a 63-year-old milliner traveling to support her widowed daughter. But as conservationists carefully opened it and studied its contents, they uncovered more than object. They uncovered a narrative shaped by fate, circumstance, and the unexpected twists of history. The revelation that Mara had originally been scheduled to sail on the Majestic was not merely a small bureaucratic detail. It was the hinge upon which her life turned. Had her passage not been rerouted, she would have completed her journey to America, lived out her days, and left behind an entirely different legacy. Instead, the handbag surfaced more than a century later from the ocean floor as a symbol of how fragile life can be, and how a simple act, a reassigned ticket, a changed schedule, can alter everything. The power of this artifact lies in its quiet intimacy. Unlike grand pieces of the ship's structure or ornate objects from first-class cabins, the handbag represents everyday humanity. It belonged to a working woman. It held ordinary items. It traveled not in luxury, but in the modest quarters of third class. And yet, its survival gives voice to a life that might otherwise have been forgotten. For researchers, the handbag underscores the purpose of Titanic preservation efforts. Salvaging items from the wreck is not about spectacle or ownership, it is about memory. These objects allow us to piece together not just the mechanics of the sinking, but the stories of the people on board. They transform statistics into individuals. They give names to the nameless and depth to the historical record. The emotional impact of such discoveries cannot be overstated. When the handbag was displayed to the public, people reacted with a mix of awe and sorrow. What touched them was not its age or its condition. It was the sense of closeness, the realization that they were looking at something held and used by a real person moments before an unimaginable event. In that moment, history ceases to be abstract. It becomes personal. This is why organizations like RMS Titanic, Inc. continue their expeditions. New artifacts offer new insights, not just into the ship's final hours, but into the experiences of the passengers who boarded with hopes and futures ahead of them. Each recovered item, no matter how small, has the potential to illuminate an untold part of the story. The latest expeditions have already identified more objects resting in the debris field, waiting silently in the cold darkness for over 110 years. Some may be as revelatory as Mara's handbag. Others may be simple fragments of daily life. But together, they weave the tapestry of a tragedy whose impact spans generations. In many ways, the handbag also highlights the fragile boundary between science and remembrance. Researchers must approach their work with technical precision, yet the weight of the human stories they uncover adds layers of meaning to every discovery. The process of recovering and conserving these objects becomes a form of stewardship, an obligation to honor the past, protect the artifacts, and share their stories with the world. For descendants, historians, and the general public, these artifacts form a bridge across time. They remind us that the Titanic was not just a ship, but a microcosm of society, rich and poor, young and old, hopeful and burdened, brought together by circumstance and separated by catastrophe. And so, the handbag remains more than an exhibit piece. It is a testament to resilience, memory, and the unbroken connection between those who lived the story and those who seek to understand it. In its stitching, its leather, and the faded ink on the documents inside, it carries the weight of an entire era. More than a century after the Titanic sank, researchers still find themselves humbled by what emerges from the deep. Every artifact retrieved is a message from the past, a whisper carried through time. And with each recovered item, we are reminded that history is not just written in books, it is preserved in the objects people leave behind. What began as a routine cataloging of recovered items became, through one handbag, a powerful reminder of the human side of one of the world's greatest maritime tragedies. It shows us that behind every artifact is a life, behind every discovery a story, and behind every story an opportunity to remember. If this discovery blew your mind, hit like and subscribe right now because we have more Titanic secrets coming and you do not want to miss them. Drop a comment. Should the Titanic wreck be left alone or explored further? Let's hear your take.